Why should the Jazz not draft VJ Edgecombe at 5 if he's there? And should they draft Jeremiah Fears if he's there? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. My name's Leif Thulin. I'm excited as always to have the opportunity to fill in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz. As you guys may know by now, I'm a lifelong Jazz fan who's credentialed NBA draft analyst for Locked On NBA Big Board, attendee of the 2023 and 2024 NBA Draft Combine, Utah Jazz broadcast assistant and statistician the past 4 seasons, lover of college hoops. So I've seen all these guys we're going to talk about throughout the next couple weeks, and don't expect all the geeky numbers of usual that you're accustomed to be gone, but I'll bring a unique perspective as the college hoops expert, draft analyst, and Jazz employee, and most importantly, diehard fan, to make you guys as knowledgeable about your Utah Jazz as possible before the draft. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen each and every day. Remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is to comment anything below. Today's question is, who do you prefer between Jeremiah Fears and VJ Edgecombe? I'm going to tell you why I don't love the idea of picking VJ Edgecombe at 5, and I'm not all the way there on picking Fears at 5 either, but I'll give you the reasons why it is a palatable pick for Fears for me as opposed to Edgecombe, where I would be frustrated. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. So today I'm going to tell you about my concerns with VJ Edgecombe that make me against picking him at 5, break down his game in depth, break down the electrifying but erratic game of Jeremiah Fears while still acknowledging concern with that pick, and then compare the two in general, not just about the Jazz, but in general as prospects, and why, regardless of being a Jazz fan or wanting this pick for the Jazz or not, why I lean Jeremiah Fears over VJ Edgecombe despite consensus saying VJ Edgecombe is better. So let's dive right in. So VJ Edgecombe, for those of you who don't know, is a 6'4" barefoot, and everyone's making a big deal about this. 6'4", so basically 6'5" with shoes on, guard from Baylor. He's from the Bahamas, and the reason he has so much buzz coming into the season and throughout the season was he was excellent on the Bahama national team with Buddy Hield and Eric Gordon. He stood out as one of their best players, and that's impressive. Don't get me wrong. He's nearly 20 years old, scored 15 points per game, shot 34% from 3, averaged 5.6 rebounds, which is very impressive as a 2-guard, shot 78% from the free throw line, and his numbers got better in conference play as opposed to dipping conference play. But I think part of that has to do with he did not play well in non-conference, and that does bother me. So VJ Edgecombe, why do most people have him top 5 and maybe even most people have him top 4 on mock drafts? It's because he's a top 5 percentile athlete in the NBA the moment he steps foot in the NBA. And that's great. Don't get me wrong. But I do think he's vastly overrated on the defensive side. Like, athleticism is it is a prerequisite for being good defensively. But if you're a good athlete, it doesn't mean you're instantaneously an excellent defender. And I think that is a misnomer that is being said about VJ Edgecombe. And then, all those players in that ilk, and we'll talk about some of those guys coming up. But as ever for a player in his ilk, shooting is going to be the most important swing skill. Don't get me wrong. Like, the athleticism is impressive, especially if you can get to the rim a lot, but shooting is going to make or break how well he plays, whether he's the star or he's a role player. I mentioned he had a shaky start for the season. He really struggled in non-conference play, and what bothered me tremendously is he was a chameleon. A 5-star being a chameleon is not a good thing. Being a chameleon and fitting in a lot of situations can be good, but not in this situation. I also would like to tell you that his numbers in conference play were very good, and it made me do a 360 or a 180 because I was all the way out, and now I can at least palate the idea. It's still not my favorite. But since New Year, his numbers rebounded dramatically. His three-point shooting, his efficiency, his free throw shooting, and his standstill shooting convinced me. Do I think he's got more potential as a shooter off the bounce? That's where I have hesitation, but I do think he's a standstill solid shooter. He's a very good athlete, gets the rim a lot. But I think the true ceiling for VJ Edgecombe's game will be determined by what he can do with his shot on the move or off of the dribble, and then what he can do off the ball. If his shot is not particularly great, how well does he create attacking closeouts of players that are closer to him athletically in the NBA than what they were in college? So that's why VJ Edgecombe terrifies me for the Utah Jazz, because he does not do anything as the primary operator. His rim attacks were out of attacking closeouts or designed actions getting through him. You watched him play, for those of you who are later tuning into the college basketball season, you watched him play Gonzaga at the very start of the season, and you were like, well, what did he do? Oh, yeah, he dunked on Mark Few's kid, a walk-on, a 6-foot kid who doesn't play. And everyone said, oh, VJ Edgecombe, tremendous athletes. But, like, you watched the game, and he was a non-factor. In fact, he was bad. Then you watched him against a guy in Carter Bryant in Arizona, and he got to the rim a ton, and he shot 14 free throws. And you say, wow, that's tremendous, because free throws is a prerequisite to being a really good scorer. But I still didn't see separation creation. And then you get to the March Madness crowd, and they played Mississippi State. VJ Edgecombe was solid, but when he scored, it was out of design plays that they throw it to the high post, and they ran a scissor action and pitched it off to VJ Edgecombe going downhill, and that's where he was successful and put the game on ice at different times. And even then was a little bit questionable. So the biggest weapon to me and why he terrifies me is because I believe for the Utah Jazz, picking top 5, the Jazz should be looking for a franchise-altering talent. I say that all the time, but I do not see franchise-altering talent as someone who's not a primary operator on his collegiate team. Rob Wright was the best at getting to the rim on Baylor's team. He was the guy with the ball in his hands. Jeremy Roach at times had the ball, and that's not all VJ Edgecombe's fault. He played with other good players. But I just don't see a star in the making of when you're a star in college basketball, or you should be a star in college basketball, you typically stand out more than he did. And to me, the biggest weapon for guards is off the dribble shooting, and he did so little of it. He was very infrequently someone who created his own shot using the dribble, whether it was off of screens or stopping and popping, using the threat of his acceleration and leaping ability to go to the rim to stop on a dime and shoot. Like, that's what Donovan Mitchell is so spectacular at for the Utah Jazz. And I'm not comparing the two. But Donovan Mitchell was known as a tremendous athlete first and foremost, but became a deadly off the dribble shooter, and that's what's made him so good for his entire NBA career. So while his shot improved drastically, I don't see a star. I see a role player with flaws that the best role players do not have. He's not big enough to guard tons of positions. He can, like, people are thrilled he's 6'4", but 6'4" without shoes for a 2 guard is undersized, and he's not a point guard. So I don't see the defensive versatility that some people say he has. His wingspan's longer than his height, but it's not longer by a ton. Like, there are limiting factors defensively, and then there's the expectation he's a fantastic defender. But honestly, this is going to be a hot take, and I know this is going to get clipped and aggregated. Say what you want. But if you watch Con Knippel defend and you watch VJ Edgecombe defend, and you say, I'm not going to see who's the better athlete and project it forward, but you just watch them defend collegiate basketball players, Con Knippel was a better defender, and I don't think it was particularly close. Like, he stayed in front of players better than VJ Edgecombe does. He doesn't have blocks, and he doesn't rebound at the same rate. He's not as good a jumper, don't get me wrong, and he's not going to jump passing lanes. But in terms of sliding his feet and staying in front of the other guy, Con Knippel was better than VJ Edgecombe, but VJ Edgecombe is considered a great defender by all draft reports. So clip that up however you'd like. I don't think he's a star defensively. I think he's got traits that can make him solid defensively relatively quickly in his career. And then for statistics, if you don't want my word for it, but you guys are statistically inclined, he was 21st percentile as an off the dribble shooter, making just 25% of shots when putting the ball on the deck. And that is regardless of length of shot. So that could be threes, that could be a mid-range jump shot, but just 25%. So not very good. And 21st percentile compared to all college players, not just draft prospects. And then his average he was an average guarded catch and shoot shooter, very good catch and shoot as an open shooter. He's 82nd percentile. So that's where I tell you, I think I am confident that he can be a knockdown shooter and then use that knockdown shooting ability to go downhill. But once again, that to me means he's off the ball. So overall, a solid shooter, but he's a solid shooter as a beneficiary, not as the creator. So at the rim, here's my biggest concern. His athleticism is his greatest strength. And don't get me wrong, that is a real deal trait. But he is not someone who creates it all for himself. We just established that. His isolation numbers were okay. They were okay and considered average by synergy. And then at the rim, despite being the fantastic athlete that we know he is, he's a 36th percentile finisher at the rim and only 15th percentile on layups. So if you take out dunks, which are obviously fantastic, he's only 15th percentile on layups as compared to college basketball players. So he's neither a good stop and pop shooter, neither a good off the dribble 3-point shooter, nor a good finisher at the rim. So I just don't see the isolation creation being that good. To me, that's not a primary guy. I don't think it ever will be. To me, that's a flawed role player with great traits that if he's on the right system can be a defensive hound in terms of guarding guards, not the versatile defender that I see him as being compared to. And people have likened him to Drew Holiday, Victor Oladipo, Dwayne Wade, a little bit to Donovan Mitchell. But those first three I mentioned are tremendous defenders because they're longer than he is and they're built stronger. I think he's got the wiry strength, and that's great. But those guys, Drew Holiday was an amazing defender since the age of 4. Like he was an amazing defender at UCLA. Oladipo was an amazing defender at Indiana. Came into the NBA. Dwayne Wade was one of the best guard defenders ever. So I think those are comparisons, even offensively, I think are too lofty. But defensively, I think that's crazy. And while Donovan's a little bit different, Donovan's explosive, and he didn't have a great handle, but his handle was better in college than VJ Edgecombe's is, and Donovan's handle got way better as he had more game than he was able to display with Rick Pitino in Louisville. Whereas VJ had tons of opportunities to attack, but he blended in from the start of the season. That always has irked me. So I'll fully admit I've never been on the VJ train. I tried to convince myself, and I thought during Big 12 play he did a good job. So I'm not holding that against him. But I just don't see the star. And if I'm the Utah Jazz, I'm trying to draft a star. I'm not trying to draft a guy I see as a potential role player. So coming up next, we're going to do a deep dive into the game of Jeremiah Fears, and we'll also compare him to VJ Edgecombe coming up. So all that and more straight ahead on the Locked On Jazz. There's nothing like stepping into your own outdoor space and feeling like you escaped into a personal oasis. If you're wanting to update your patio this season, Wayfair has made it so easy to turn into a space that feels like yours, comfortable, stylish, and ready for summer. Wayfair has everything you need to level up your outdoor space: conversation sets, outdoor bars, fire pits, hot tubs, gazebos, and yes, even perfect string lights to set the vibe. It's like giving your backyard that resort feel without the resort price tag. So, for my own personal experience, I recently picked up a new outdoor dining set and some modern lounge chairs, and they completely transformed the patio. The best part, the delivery was free, fast, and totally hassle-free, even with those larger items like the lounge chairs. You'd think they'd be like, oh, man, this is difficult to move. We're going to tack on a fee. They did not. It was free, fast, totally hassle-free. And whether I'm hosting friends or just unwinding with a book, it genuinely feels like my own private retreat. Comfort and style all off the charts. So don't wait. Make the outdoor space your dream oasis today with Wayfair and enjoy it all summer long. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop a huge outdoor selection. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. And I also want to tell you guys about my friends at Intercap Lending. Intercap, though it seems small because of how great they are, you think, oh, this can't be that big because they're so hyper responsive and they embrace change and they care about our borrower experience. They're actually huge. It's a direct issuer that's in 44 states, not just Utah, and they have that small feel because they care that much about you, but are massively successful everywhere. So you can service your loan, have long-term relationships, and it's better for the consumer. Like, we can talk about that all day, but it really matters to have a good relationship. And Steve Carter is our personal loan officer for Locked On Jazz. So you can call him at 385-800-8528 and make sure to tell him that you're a Locked On Jazz listener to get the corporate discount. Intercap Lending, NMLS number 190465. For more information, visit intercaplending.com and make sure you say that Locked On Jazz sent you in. Welcome back. I love draft season, guys, and I love it for the Utah Jazz, but I love it in general. And this is the most interesting part of the draft psychology and evaluation to me, because up until recently, everyone, and I mean everyone, had VJ Edgecombe ahead of Jeremiah Fears. Jeremiah Fears, Rafael Barlow, who we'll talk about, he's been on Locked On Jazz. James Barlow, his brother, and I, we were kind of the highest trio on Jeremiah Fears. But recently, Jeremiah Fears has taken on some buzz, and the Nets are really tied to him. They really want him 8, but they may have to trade up to get him. I saw rumors that he won't fall outside the top 5, which obviously would impact the Utah Jazz because maybe they'd be taking him at 5. So let's talk about Jeremiah Fears and why I think it's strange that Edgecombe has been seen as such a vastly superior prospect much of this season, despite the numbers and the usage indicating that Fears would be better. So this is where the psychology is interesting to me, because maybe he's safer, but I don't think he's quite got the potential, even though everyone else says VJ Edgecombe's got a high ceiling. So let's get into this. They were seeded similarly in March Madness, Baylor and Oklahoma, and one was a star first team with far less talent around him, and that was the only reason they made the tournament. That's Jeremiah Fears. He scored more points, had more assists, but was seen as less capable of becoming a star. And I think he has better vision, and he was a far better attacker of defenses, but he was seen as less capable of being a star at the next level. I would argue the reason that people thought that is because he's smaller, but I would also then argue he's bigger at his size than VJ Edgecombe is for his size at his position. Jeremiah Fears is a point guard. VJ Edgecombe is a 2 guard. One of them is 6'2 3/4", and he's a point guard, and the other one's 6'4" as a 2 guard. Like, I think Fears is bigger compared to his position. And he's not quite the athlete that Edgecombe is, but he uses his athleticism to be a better downhill attacker and has better vision to be a passer. So with that said, Jeremiah Fears is awesome. He's one of my favorite watches. He had games of 30 against Michigan, including a game winner. They had big wins against Michigan, Arizona, tons of games that really mattered to get them into the tournament. When it really mattered, they needed to win a few games. He had 29 and then 28 in the SEC tournament to get into the tournament, then scored 20 and carried a very inefficient team in Oklahoma to a tight game against the defending champs, UConn. He averaged 17.1 points per game, shot 28% from 3. That's where the concern is. Had 4.1 assists and 4.1 rebounds, had plenty of turnovers. He shot 85% of the line, so that may dispel the notion of, he can't shoot, because many people say that free throw shooting matters more than three-point shooting. It's a better indicator of touch, and in this case, I actually agree. My biggest belief is that usage rate in terms of volume shooting from 3 is the most important, and this supports that notion. Fears had the highest usage rate of any freshman in the nation. That's higher than that of Trey Johnson, and we talked about having very little help. And then there are a few things that come with the territory. For starters, he turns the ball over incessantly. Like, he has way too many turnovers. But while he still could be an effective playmaker, he often finds openings for his teammates as a byproduct of his skills getting through him. So think of Ja Morant. Ja Morant's super quick, and he can hang in the air and create things out of nothing. And sometimes it's not a predetermined read or some processing marvel. It's that he's so athletic, his traits get other people open. So make of that what you will. Fears does it to a lesser degree than Morant, but that's the example I'll give you. Now, while he creates advantages, he also confidently takes deep NBA threes, and he can do pull-up jump shots from mid-range, from deep, and his accuracy is streaky at best, but pretty poor from that 28%. But what I'll tell you is he gets to the paint with ease, draws fouls at an absurdly high level for someone of his size and age. He could have been a high school senior this year, and instead it played college basketball and scored 17 points per game on a team that was in the best conference in history and made it to the tournament. He actually, if you want some real numbers, he got to the free throw line at a higher rate than Ja Morant or Damian Lillard did in their final college season. Damian Lillard was 22 in his final season. Ja was 20. So here's a quote that I found in reading up on Fears, and I wanted to kind of approach it differently, and then I'll get into my take. But here's a quote from a source that I don't know how high they are in Fears. In fact, it's actually ranked lower than Edgecombe by a substantial margin. But I thought this mattered in terms of giving you a fair evaluation. So the quote is, when the controlled handle couples with the speed as he turns the corner, when the pull-up game is aligned just so, he has the look of a top 5 prospect with clear pathways to stardom. With refinement of his jumper and some time spent building his core and lower body strength, Fears has the makings of a potent lead guard. Without them, Fears' as glaringly obvious gifts could get obscured at the next level. And that is perfectly spot on with how I feel. I think Jeremiah Fears has top 5 upside in this class. I said that a long time ago, that if you made me rank out 1 through 5 who I think are the most likely players to become all-stars, Fears is easily in my top 5. I've said that since about November when he hit the game winner against Michigan. But I have concern about his size. I know I said that, you shouldn't be concerned because it's no different than Edgecombe, but that's because I still have concerns about Edgecombe in terms of his size. And I believe, having watched the Jazz with Mike Conley and Donovan Mitchell, you need a big guard. You need a big guard. And Fears, if he can't shoot, the Jazz have Isaiah Collier. I don't believe in fit. I'm a best player available over fit every single time. But, you could be getting some redundancy and you run into similar issues. If he can't shoot and he's a creator who is an offensive scorer, like Collier at least is a more natural creator than Fears. Fears is a more natural scorer. But that's where the drawback is. If you look at VJ Edgecombe, you don't see that upside based on what the stats tell you, nor what the tape tells you. You see it just on athletic appeal. But the athletic appeal stands out for Fears too. So now let's get back to some numbers. Fears is a 66th percentile catch and shoot guy. And while that's not fantastic, that's better than what VJ Edgecombe was. He's a 70th percentile isolation guy. VJ was 40th percentile. And this VJ Edgecombe's team was better than Fears's. Dribble jumper was considered average, and his runner was excellent. And when he shoots at the rim, he wasn't particularly great because he needs to get stronger, but he was ahead of VJ Edgecombe at the rim, despite a higher volume, far more difficulty when going to the rim, and not those obvious athletic traits. So Jeremiah Fears, to me, has more upside, but I do wonder because if he's in the NBA and you want him to do his thing, his role definition is he's got to have the ball in his hands. Edgecombe, at least, there's an off-ball role for him that I think he can thrive in. It just doesn't warrant top 5 pick to me. So we're going to discuss that and a little bit more. We know the games of VJ Edgecombe and Jeremiah Fears now. So I'll tell you, while both scare me to a degree, why I'd be willing to take the risk on Fears more easily than Edgecombe. And I've alluded to it already, but I got that and a little bit more ahead on Locked On Jazz. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs. The intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds, the kind of atmosphere you must experience live. And man, do I miss the Jazz playoff games. I was lucky enough to go to a lot of them as kids. I worked a couple in the most recent playoff run the Jazz had. And like every year, this year's matchups have already delivered. If you want in, Game Time makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff game. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Game Time is a total game changer. I love that I can see my seat before I view it, and there's no surprises. And I can vouch for that because I went to the U.S. Open, and I did not want to have my view obscured of the great tennis with a lamp or a post in my way. Instead, I saw exactly what I'd be seeing on Arthur Ashe Stadium, and I made sure on Louis Armstrong to do the exact same. The big stadiums there, you don't know what's going to be in front of you because they're built differently. It's not a standard like a gym. I made sure to see it on a tennis court, and I know it would work on a basketball court after having done that. And the app makes it ridiculously simple. There's 2 taps, and I'm done. Also, Game Time makes NFL tickets, getting those easy as possible. And with Game Time guarantee, your tickets are 100% authentic, will arrive on time, and you'll get the best price with fees included. So what you see is what you play. Take the guesswork out of buying the tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, and I was scrolling through Twitter, as one does who cares about the NBA draft, and a lot of rumors were floating about. And then I saw something that Andy Larson from the Salt Lake Tribune had tweeted out, and he was in a conversation with another fan, and his quote said, so to me, you're looking for a helpful building block in this draft if you're the Utah Jazz. For the team, you want to excuse me, let me restart that. So he says, so to me, you're looking for the helpful building blocks in this draft if you're the Jazz. For the team you want to become, then take VJ Edgecombe. So his point would then be that you'd like, if you're trying to pick a role player, Edgecombe is far more likely to be a role player that excels in a role than a guy like Jeremiah Fears. And it wasn't differentiating between the two. And I'm trying to iron down a date with Andy Larson to discuss this about Edgecombe versus Trey Johnson versus Fears versus Ace Bailey and all of those things. But his point is essentially VJ Edgecombe has traits that could make him a role player. So if you're trying to get a piece but not the dude, then I'm okay with the logic. Because if you're drafting a guy who can be a third option, maybe play perimeter defense to end time, and what you need is a guy who can supplement the guy, then that's fine. But the Jazz don't have the guy. They don't already. The Jazz have already said they're not tanking. Well, I still think that means we're going to draft in the top 8 next year, because I think it would be lunacy to not draft in the top 8 next year when you would give that pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder. That still, to me, means the Jazz should draft an advantage creator, not a beneficiary of those who have created an advantage. And to me, Jeremiah Fears can create that advantage. He can get downhill and create for others, and he can score for himself far more easily than what VJ Edgecombe has been able to display. I mentioned it at the out of that last one. I think Fears, if you're to rank upside, just say what is their top end outcome. I see Fears as a top 5 upside guy in this class. My fear for Fears is he has to be a star, meaning for him to do what he does well and the traits that stand out saying that he could be a top 5 guy in the class would indicate that he needs the ball in his hands. And he needs the ball in his hands early and often. The Jazz have guys that already want the ball in their hands. So if you have one of those guys already, then how do you justify saying, you know what, we're going to put the ball in this guy's hands? And if he struggles early, what happens with Collier? What happens with Keyonte George, who each have had moments of brilliance early in their careers? Like Keyonte, as a rookie, scored 16 points per game, yet he was critical. Everyone was critical of him in the offseason because, you know what, he's not a natural point guard. And it turns out you're right. He wasn't. And Danny Ainge asked, is Keyonte the point guard of the future? No, he's not. But does he factor into the future? Yes. That means he was good. Collier, I don't know if he's the point guard of the future. And if you were to draft Fears, you'd probably be thinking not, and you'd be hoping Fears would be. But Fears would have to be a star for those traits to take over. His ability to be dynamic, get downhill, have the guile he has, the burst he has, and the creation ability that are based on natural traits of being able to explode to the rim and finish with either hand and have the confidence, the chutzpah to knock down shots in big moments, hit that game winner against Michigan in the Bahamas, to score 30 points when the team needs it to win games. That is what you need from Fears, but he doesn't necessarily come with a high floor. I think Edgecombe, the more I've evaluated him, I think he's got a higher floor. And so teams that already have their guy should be looking for VJ Edgecombe, not for a team like the Jazz where they don't have their guy. Edgecombe could go 3 to Philly for all I know, and it makes a little more sense to me. Or in the sense of Charlotte, where he's most frequently tied, it makes some sense. Even though I'm lower on him, and I don't believe in fit that much. I believe in best player available. It makes significantly more sense to me for VJ Edgecombe to go to one of those teams than the Utah Jazz. Because unless you believe he can be a star and his creation can really improve, then you're drafting a 3rd or 4th option at pick 5. And I don't believe in that, especially in a draft I believe has a couple all-stars in it. I thought of a comparison. I hadn't really prepared this, but I thought of a comparison as I was talking about the game of Jeremiah Fears in terms of the burst and his ability to go downhill. And this guy played briefly for the Jazz, but his best stint was not with the Jazz. But he's quick as a cat, gets to the rim, was a competent shooter, but no one you'd ever be like, oh my gosh, we got to run him off the 3-point line. And I thought he was a competent passer, a clever player who is best served as a 3rd or 4th option on teams, but at times was the star, and that was Devin Harris. Devin Harris, to me, is a mid-level outcome for what Jeremiah Fears is. I think Fears has a far better chance of becoming an all-star and be a better player than I'd indicate by saying that's a top-end outcome. But Devin Harris was a good basketball player. When he was with the Mavericks early in his career, he was using speed to create advantages, find Dirk Nowitzki, find Josh Howard, use his speed to individually create. When he played with the Nets before being traded to the Jazz, he was able to be a primary option and score the basketball. I see something similar for Fears, but that's not a player you would take in the top 5. No offense to Devin Harris. You don't take that. You try to take someone with Devin Harris plus some more, and that's what you hope Fears can be. As opposed to VJ Edgecombe, he's compared most frequently to the Victor Oladipos of the world. I think it's more likely he's going to be a defensively oriented 3-and-D who becomes an average NBA shooter and is able to put pressure on the rim in transition, but maybe not as well in a half-court setting. I don't think you'll ever see him have a change of pace, crossover, and burst and be the top guy that you expect. Because even Victor Oladipo, who had one all-star season, I think had more, not burst, but more change of pace, more suddenness, and more intangible of how to play off the ball. Victor Oladipo was a tremendous cutter. He knew where to go. When he was at Indiana, he played in a good team, and he found a way to use his physical strength and athleticism to impact the game before his skills caught up. His skills caught up and got better in the NBA, and he became a better shooter. I think that's the best case scenario. And if you were to ask me, Oladipo in a redraft, despite his class actually being one of the more poor drafts, most classes he doesn't end up top 5. And that's why I'd be fearful of taking either of these players, but more fearful of taking Edgecombe because I don't see the upside that many people see. And I very well could be wrong. There's tons of people I respect that rank VJ Edgecombe in the top 3, top 4. But at 5, it's a little rich for my blood. I'm hoping VJ Edgecombe gets drafted by Charlotte or Philly as opposed to by the Utah Jazz, because if he goes above the Jazz and the Jazz stand pat at 5, that means an Ace Bailey or a Trey Johnson falls. Fears, to me, has more upside. I still am fearful of that pick, because you're drafting a player that you pretty much are banking on to be a star. And I think there's less room for margin there. So for different reasons, I'm scared of both these guys. I really hope the Jazz find their way to away from VJ Edgecombe or Fears and find their way to Trey Johnson or Ace Bailey. I'm just putting my cards on the table early. Those are the guys that I want the Jazz to find. I don't know if it's worthwhile to trade up. That's a question that I'm going to answer more because you trade up, and what if you could get that guy at 5? It's a pricey thing. And I also think teams are going to be less willing to trade up with a team at 5. Let's say it's the Jazz trying to get to 3. I think Philly's going to want an established NBA basketball player. So that means it would be Lauri as opposed to trading the pick up. So I think it's more likely that teams that are not in the lottery make a trade with Philly than the teams in the lottery. But we're going to talk about that as a possibility and a lot of more fun stuff coming up this week. We got Tony Jones and Andy Larson next week. And it's a pleasure, as always, speaking with you about the draft. Let me know what you guys think. Am I being too critical of VJ Edgecombe, or have I opened your eyes to some fears that you deem to be fair? So thank you guys for making Locked On Jazz your first listen today. And for your second, check out Locked On NBA Big Board. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the draft. So find Locked On NBA Big Board on your YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and check that out and stay with us on Locked On Jazz. And we'll have some more fun draft conversations coming up throughout the week.